Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a God Shift podcast with Shayna Rattler. I am your host, Shayna Rattler, and I am excited for this episode, just like I am all of the episodes. I am going to get started with introducing you to my guest in a minute, but if you've listened to this podcast before, you know how I start every single one of them when I welcome you. If you would take a screenshot of wherever it is that you are listening to this podcast, so if you're watching it on YouTube, take a screenshot of your device. If you're listening to it on a device, take a screenshot of that. And if you will do me another favor, after you screenshot it, if you will post it on social media and tag us here at A God Shift, I would really appreciate it, because that just helps us to get these words into more hands of people that need to overcome disruption and get into their destiny. So again, take a screenshot of wherever it is that you are listening to this podcast. And when you post it, share it and tag us here at A God Shift. So I am going to read my guest's bio and hope I don't butcher his last name, because I usually ask people before we start this if I'm saying their name right. So if I don't, Christian, you correct me when I finish reading your bio, okay? So here we go. With 30 years of experience, Christian de la Huerta, is that right?
Close enough. It's de la Huerta, like the state, Delaware.
De la Huerta, perfect. Christian de la Huerta is a sought-after spiritual teacher, personal transformation coach, and leading voice in the breathwork community. He has traveled the world offering inspiring and transformational retreats, combining psychological and spiritual teachings with lasting and life-changing effects. An award-winning, critically acclaimed author, he has spoken at numerous universities and conferences and on the TEDx stage. His new book, Awakening the Soul of Power, was described by multiple Grammy Award winner Gloria Estefan as a balm for the soul of anyone searching for truth and answers to life's difficult questions. To find out more about his work and receive a free guided meditation, power practices, and a chapter from the book, visit soulfulpower.com. Welcome, Christian. How are you today?
Thank you so much, Shayna, for having me on the show. I'm well. And by the way, congrats on the new TV show.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Depending on when you're listening to this, you probably don't even know what he's talking about. But we do have a new television show that begins airing on May the 6th. And it's called A God Shift with Shayna Rattler. And you can find that on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire Stick, on the SGA Faith Network. So this podcast is actually going to be a little bit different than most of the podcasts that you all have listened to. If you've listened to any of my other podcasts, we're usually talking to people who are doing one of two things. So first, let me just lay a little bit of groundwork. This is a God Shift podcast. And my definition of a God Shift is the moment that a disruption in your life collides with God's purpose and ultimately moves you into a greater destiny. And I believe that God uses these forms of disruption and unexpected circumstances in our life to get our attention. Because usually there is, another path that he has planned for us. There is, another level of destiny that awaits us, even if we feel like we're living our best life. And if he did not get our attention through disruption, through unexpected circumstances, and they don't always have to be negative, for many of us, we would never pay attention to what it is that we need to become next and what it is that we need to do next. So I think it's good for us to lay that foundation. But on most of the episodes that you all listen to, I am either interviewing people who are on the other side of their God shift, and they are actually, what's the word I'm looking for? Highlighting the highs and lows of their journey and talking about what they learned and who they are now, or it is someone who is in the middle of their God shift and they actually need the support and guidance to figure out how do they learn what it is that God is trying to get them to see or what it is that he needs them to do next. But today is a special episode, and I am interviewing Christian as more of an expert. So where we are going to ping pong back and forth in this conversation and really give you all some practical yet spiritually based strategies and tips that you can use if you ever find yourself in a place of disruption. So, Christian, before we do that, I know I read your official bio, but tell us a little bit in your own words about who you are and how you show up in the world.
Thank you so much, Shayna. I'm a personal transformation coach, a retreat facilitator, I'm an author, and I've been doing this kind of work for over 30 years now. So my degree is in psychology, and I was on a track to get a PhD in psychology. My dad was a psychiatrist, so I come out of the psychotherapy tradition. And then about, over a little bit over 30 years ago, I discovered a healing technique derived from the East that is based on breathing. And I changed my life. Like that one session took me in a whole other direction. And I've been teaching that, among other things, all over the world for the last, 3 decades.
I love that. I love that. You meet probably some people who have been through a lot of disruption. I imagine that you have worked with a lot of people who find themselves facing unexpected circumstances. So in your opinion, and also in your experience, how can disruption be something that is actually beneficial to someone's life?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's happened so many times in my life. And I think it's when the little us, which I refer to as the ego mind, the little of us that feel separate and apart, and that is separate from our higher purpose and our higher connection to spirit, to the sacred, when we're not aligned, when we've been selling out or playing small or holding back from really living our purpose out of fear of whatever manifestation of fear it is, sometimes that's what's required, like an adjustment, like a reality check. And you hear it all the time. We hear about people who are faced with unexpected illness or some kind of drama in their life, which ultimately ends up being a really more like a wake-up call, like a reality check. And yeah, so if you, I used to have a teacher that used to say, when you get the call, you either go willingly or you're going to be dragged, by your hair kicking and screaming.
Right. I often say, like, you can either shift or you can be shoved. Right.
Yeah.
What I love about what you're saying is that the negative experiences are the ones that probably tend to get our attention the most. They get the most attention of the media. They get the most remembrance of us. Oftentimes they have the most impact. But sometimes disruption or unexpected circumstance can be, yes, you had to move to the other side of the country, which required you to leave everything that was familiar, but you got the job of your dreams. You're making the most amount of, money in your life. So I think that oftentimes it's easy for people to think that disruption is inherently, something that is negative, but it can actually be a positive thing as well. But one of the things that I was thinking about when you were speaking is that it's that moment where when you look back, like it's devastating potentially when it's happening. You don't understand everything during the process, but when you look back, you're able to recognize that that was the pivotal moment that had to occur in order for you to get to the better place that you're in now, and recognizing that what happened actually happened for you and not to you, right?
Exactly. And there's a word that I love that's called pronoia, which is the opposite of paranoia. So a paranoid relationship to life is like, look what life did to me. If it only had been for this or that, then I would be happy.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like an adversarial relationship, victim relationship to life. Pronoia is the opposite, is what you're just talking about. It is that life has a vested interest in us and is actually collaborating on our behalf, even if we can't see it yet. So like a great example of like, I thought about when you were speaking about moving to the other side of the world, to the other side of the country, 30 years ago when I went on my spiritual journey, and I quit my job and sold my condo on the water and sold my car. I gave away most of my belongings except for my books and my Armani suits. So it tells you a little bit about my attachments. So I flew over to Hawaii with a spiritual teacher at a small community of 6, and we actually had used my credit cards, which I had paid off all my debt and brought in a few $1,000s into the community as to help us get to Hawaii, where we had been guided to go and set up a community there. long story short, by the end of the summer, it was just me and her. Like she had either kicked out some people, or some people just couldn't cut the
Right. Some people
stretch of
just
life.
couldn't cut it.
They just couldn't cut it. They missed their sex and drugs and rock and roll or whatever they were missing. And so we had actually, she and I lived off my credit cards for 6 months, with the intentions. Like, I don't hold anything, like I don't have any problem about it, because it turned out to be such a valuable lesson. And I don't often speak about it, but it's helpful, because in using my credit cards, little by little, the intention was that as soon as the work took off, we would pay off my credit card. Well, guess what? The work never really took off. And so little by little, one credit card canceled, the other one canceled, another creditor here. And my identity had been so connected to my success, quote unquote, in the eyes of the world. And so it was incredibly difficult. Like it got to the point that we had storage units in Honolulu, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, stuff all over the place. We got kicked out of one of those corporate living apartments. We were living actually for a week in a rental car. And we'd get up in the morning and take shower, go to the YMCA and take showers. And I can't even begin to tell you how difficult that was. But what I learned was trust.
Wow.
Because no matter, like there was nothing left to pawn. I had pawned stereos, CDs, whatever we had that wasn't in storage, a chain that former girlfriend had given to me back in high school. And that was it. There was nothing else to chain. And every time, money would show up from unexpected sources at the last minute. So it's, like, I don't wish it for anybody to go through that, to have to learn trust, but it was so invaluable, because now I know at my core, at the cellular level in my body, that I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that's was an invaluable lesson.
I want to unpack something that you said a little bit, and it actually, is a great segue into what I wanted to talk about next, when you talked about your attachments, right? And so one of the things that I recognize is that a lot of times, one of the things that can hold us back from shifting successfully, whether we know that we need to become someone better, whether we know it's time in our life to do something different, one of the things that I think can actually sabotage that process is the things that we're attached to, because oftentimes we're attached to either doing things the way that they've always been done, or we're attached to what we had in mind. So in your experience, Christian, what do you think are some of the most common barriers that could prevent somebody from being able to embrace disruption and create a better life for themselves?
Yeah, and that's such a powerful question too. And you're right. So we don't have time to dive deeply into what the ego mind is and how it keeps us in a self-made prison of fear and limitation. But a simple metaphor to help us understand what it is it's a part of the mind that makes sense of, it's like our sense of identity, our sense of personality. Like, I'm Christian, this is Shayna. Ultimately, it's an illusion, and it's both a helpful illusion and the source of all our suffering, because it's what separates us from feeling connected to creation, to all that is, to God, whatever words you use that work for you to describe that experience. The metaphor is like, if you put a baseball in the center of the stadium, that's what the ego is. Who we are is actually the stadium. And we've allowed this tiny part of who we are to hold us back, and to think that, to run the show, and to think that it is all of who we are, and to make really important, significant choices from its very small, tiny, and always fear-based perspective. So what you're pointing to is the attachments of the ego. The ego's part of its function is to maintain the status quo, even if that status quo is miserable. And we find ourselves stuck in jobs or relationships that are sucking the very life force out of us.
Yes.
The ego doesn't care, right? To the ego, anything that signifies change is going to be really threatening to. So it holds on to people, it holds on to things, it holds on to situations. And I think that's what's at the core of what you're talking about.
That is so good. That is so good. And it's what I like about what you just said is that's what's at the core, right? Because just like in Western medicine, we have a tendency to treat the symptoms and not treat what's causing the
Mm,
symptoms. We want to treat the leaves without looking at the roots. So
yeah.
oftentimes when I am talking to other experts or I'm listening to other people give advice and they're pinpointing what is keeping people stuck, they're really at such a surface level that if they don't address what is at the core, then you've only addressed what was at the surface level right now, but you didn't really prevent either that same thing from reoccurring or another thing taking its place. So, what I love that you said, I've got like all these tweetable moments, but when you were talking about like our ego, like keeping us in this self-made prison and it's holding us back and it's dictating the choices that we're making. If we can just get that ego in check, right? Then it would automatically create a solution for so many of the issues, that we're having. So let's pause and take a quick break. And then when we come back, I actually want us to talk about what are some of the things that we can do now that we know what some of the issues are. Okay.
Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by the free guide, When God Says Shift. Inside that guide, you will discover the 4 shifts required to follow God's plan to move you out of disruption and into a greater destiny, expectancy, and possibility. Head to GodSaysShift.com to access it now. So right before that break, Christian, we were talking about like these are the things that can actually keep you stuck. You want to embrace direction or disruption. You want to collide with God's purpose. You want to get to that next level of destiny that you know has your name on it. And so we've talked about some of the key things that can hold us back and that can keep us stuck. So now let's shift into now that we have that understanding, what do we do, right? So the question that I have for you is that somebody is wanting to embrace this disruption, like what exactly can they do, right? In order to make sure that this actually develops them and doesn't destroy them.
Yeah, great question. And that's the reason why I spend the first probably third of this book, maybe quarter of this book, explaining what the ego mind is. Because if we want to have our dreams come true, if we want to have the relationships that can actually work, that we long for, with partners who can actually be a match for who we really are, if we want to have a sense of personal power, if we want to have a life that is filled with meaning and purpose, we've got to understand what the ego mind is, because that is what keeps us from all of that. Right? So, and it's work, right? It's kind of easier to go through life just reacting to circumstances and being kind of adrift by the curveballs that life throws our way. What we're talking about is really taking charge and going within and understanding who we are, what makes us do the things we do. Why do we get stuck in these patterns of relationships that sometimes, feel like we're in the same boring play with a different actor? But it's like, we've been here before. And if we're going to get really honest, the one common denominator in every single one of those relationships is us. So why do we keep attracting that kind of person or those patterns in relationship?
Yeah.
And so it's so worth it to do that work of going within and figuring ourselves out and why we do the things we do and what kind of things trigger us and what kind of situations have us giving our power away and saying yes when inside we really feel no, so that we can break free from them and just cut that out.
Yeah. And one of the things that I always recommend that people do when they're trying to accomplish anything, whether it is going within to figure out, what the underlying causes are, because you said something real key. We've been here before, right? And so if we knew how to fix it, we wouldn't keep finding ourselves in we've been here before situations. And so one of the recommendations that I always make to people is don't adopt this martyr syndrome of I can just figure it out on my own. Because one of the mistakes that I see people make, and I just had a conversation with a business colleague of mine this morning about this very thing. She teaches people how to start life coaching practices, or practices as a life coach, I guess is a better way to say it. And she says, they'll be on a webinar where you say, hey, all you need to do is have a webinar, run ads to it, and then make an offer. And so then people don't want to take advantage of the program that teaches you how to do that, because many of us understand what to do at a conceptual level. Most of us understand that, hey, maybe I have a role to play in this. But what we don't understand is that the tips that we're aware of, the steps that we are, aware of at a surface level, have 10 or 12 steps underneath them. And so you could know that you need to go within. You could know that you need to do whatever the titles of the chapters would be. But if you're not going to read the chapter and you're not going to employ somebody to help you implement this, then you're likely to continue to find yourself back in, these situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's humility implicit in what you're talking about, right? That there is no shame at all in getting help.
Yeah.
Like so many people last year, I've been doing retreats out in the real world, for the last 30 years. COVID comes and it's like suddenly I have to like pivot and figure out how to create online virtual programming, which I've known for years, right? That I needed to do. And because if I was going to broaden my reach, because I have a sense of mission to help people get free. And so COVID kind of forced my hand. And so I had to learn how to do this. I didn't know how to go about it. And I got a coach. I got a business coach to teach me how to do this.
Because you knew to do it.
Right. But I didn't know how to go about it.
You need the how to.
Exactly. And the support and the accountability. Right. So those are elements that I then put into my year-long coaching program. It's like one thing, I can give you all the content you want, but if you don't do the practices, I've delivered the teachings in piecemeal, and the book is designed that way too, right? Short chapters with practices, questions that we ask ourselves to support that process that we're talking about of discovering who we are and learning why we do the things we do. Right. But I can't do those practices for you, right? It's your life. And so by adding a system of accountability in the year long, where we have every 2 weeks, we have coaching calls with me. In the intervening weeks, they have smaller pods of 2 to 3 people, so they keep each other accountable.
Yeah.
And that's invaluable, to have that coach and that support system that's both going to hold your hand and kick your butt if you need to.
Yeah. I love what you're saying. And I want to just add on to that, because when you're hearing the information, everything is clear, right? When you go to implement the information, right, is when you realize that you don't know what you don't know. Right. And so I can tell you all day long, this is how I make this dish. And here's the recipe for that dish. But it's not until you either start making it that you realize you have a question. Yes. Or after you make it and it didn't turn out exactly like mine does, that you now have to try to figure out what you should do differently. And so what I really love about what you're saying, Christian, is that it's not just about finding a place that you can get the information, but if you really want to have a complete transformation, that ongoing support and guidance and accountability is the key to any level of success, because the doing is where most people get stuck. The starting is usually not the problem. Exactly. Recognizing that we need to obtain information is not always the problem. But being able to fully execute in the same manner that I would be able to execute is where the problem is. So I love that you're highlighting the importance of the ongoing support and guidance and accountability, because that's what gets you, in football terminology, from the red zone to the end zone.
I love that. And I love the cooking metaphor too, by the way, because in the way that you described it allows rooms for mistakes and for imperfection. And so, right, so you tried the recipe and it didn't work out like the photograph. It's like, oh, no big deal. Right. So then you call your coach, you call Shayna, hey, how did you tell me again? This is what I did. What did I do?
Did you put it in cold or warm? Because it doesn't say that.
Right. And so then if we go through life like that, there are no failures, right? Everything is a learning opportunity. And even our relationships, which is, it's a little harder to apply that understanding to this, but as long as we're growing, And as long as we're using every one of our relationships, whether they're personal, romantic, or any kind, to like shine a mirror back upon ourselves, then there are no failed relationships. As long as we're growing, as long as we're becoming better, more effective, more complete, whole, more loving human beings as a result of them.
Yeah. How do you use failure to move you forward? Because if it moves you forward, was it really a failure?
Of course not.
I did a live event a couple of weeks ago, and the woman considered her marriage to be a failure because it ended in divorce. But she now recognizes that the divorce needed to happen for all of these myriad of reasons. And I said, so therefore it wasn't a failure.
Right. And it was one of those disruptions that you talk about and write about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to begin to wrap up. So is there anything else that any last words that you would like to leave our listeners with before we tell them where they can find you and follow you and all that good stuff?
Yeah. One of the reasons that I wrote this book about personal power is because so many of us have an ambivalent relationship to it. We want it, but we're afraid of it. And no wonder, like, right, all we have to do is turn on the news on any given day to witness at least one abuse of power. And so what good-hearted person wants to be that and do that? So, and then on top of that, we've been conditioned to believe that power is a negative thing. It's a bad thing. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So what good person wants to be corrupted?
Right.
What they didn't tell us, though, about that quote is that it was speaking specifically about political power, not the interpersonal power that we're talking about. Add to the mix the fact that we've been conditioned to be afraid of our emotions. We hate conflict. We're terrified of confrontation. Put all of that into a mix. And what happens is that we end up giving our power away, our inherent God-given power that nobody can give to us, nobody can take away. Only we can give it away. So
Wow.
we end up saying yes when inside we feel no. We end up settling. We end up settling for illusions of security, for a false sense of acceptance, and for morsels, crumbs of pseudo love. And there's a different way to step into our power, to own our power, that doesn't have to be hierarchical. It doesn't have to be power over. It doesn't have to be abusive. It doesn't have to like push somebody down, put our knee to their neck in order for us to prop ourselves up and feel powerful. And that's what this book is about. How do we do that?
That is so good. So, so good. So tell us, Christian, if people are listening to this and they want to follow you or find you on social media, what's your social media platform of choice and what's your handle there?
I'm probably most active on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram and learning more about that. I'm on LinkedIn. That's where I have the most following, but it's not my favorite one so far, at least.
Where would you like us to follow you?
Any of those. Probably the best way to reach me is my website,
Okay.
soulfulpower.com. And like you were reading about in the intro, which I appreciate, if they sign up to be on my email list now, they'll get a chapter from the book. They'll get a guided meditation about trust, which connects to what we were talking about, my major life lesson. And it's a guided visual meditation which has a teaching about trust, and then I guide them through a process of stepping more fully into that.
Perfect. And so those links and where you can find them, all of that stuff will be in the show notes. That way you're not having to like pause and rewind. And what did he say? Was it soulful? Was it powerful? I will make sure that the links are in the show notes to this episode. So all that you have to do is just click them and it will take you directly to what it is that Christian is offering you. This has been a great episode. I need to find more experts that I can interview, because I think people, learn valuable things from, hearing what other people are going through. But I don't want to be the only voice that is on this platform that is giving advice and guidance. So I appreciate your insight, and I thank you for being here today.
And I so appreciate you, Shayna, and the work that you're doing, and delighted and thankful to be a guest on your show. And thank you for everything that you do on all our behalf.
You're absolutely welcome. So everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Again, remember to please screenshot it and share it on social media and tag us here at A God Shift. And I hope that you will tell your friends and colleagues about it, and that you will listen back here to the next episode. Thank you again, and have a great day. Bye.